Hey there, I'm Sam Bezek of BossStrength.com, and welcome back to episode 3 of Boss Bites, a short little podcast that I like to do daily to answer frequently asked questions with just about anything regarding health, fitness, and nutrition. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting. This is a method of dieting that you've probably heard of, but you might not be too sure about what it's all about. So before I get into exactly what intermittent fasting is, why it might work for you, and then eventually how to do it, I first want to say as a disclaimer that I am somewhat biased. I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. I think it's a great method of eating and not eating for managing calorie intake and just, being productive throughout the day and not having to worry about food intake. So I just wanted to get that out of the way that I am biased. I do use this method almost daily, but I'm going to try and address this in the most objective way possible so that you understand what intermittent fasting is and then be able to make an informed decision into whether or not you want to use it for your own nutritional habits. Okay, so first we want to just talk about what intermittent fasting is. Intermittent fasting is basically just how it sounds. You are intermittently going for extended periods of time where you're not eating food, or otherwise known as fasting. And then you have a much shorter window of time, comparatively speaking, to the fasting that you're actually eating food. Some people actually call this method of eating time-restricted feeding because you're restricting the time period in which you actually get to eat. Okay, and there's a ton of different styles. I personally follow what is known as the Lean Gains approach, where I fast for 16 hours and then eat for 8. Of course, that changes from day to day since I've been using it for, coming on probably 5 or 6 years. So I personally fast in my own ways. I fast, throughout the morning when I'm not hungry, and then I just eat as normal. However, if you're looking to specifically start to use intermittent fasting protocol, I suggest trying to stick, fairly closely to a certain ratio of fasting and feeding. There's some other methods. A lot of people do 18 hours of fasting. Some people do 20 hours of fasting. Some people even do what's known as like alternate day fasting, or the 5-2 approach, where you eat normally for 5 days, and then two of the days out of the week you significantly reduce calories, to maybe 25% of your normal calorie intake. Methods like alternate day fasting, which would simply be eating as normal on one day and then fasting the next, or severely restricting calories, much like 5-2. That's primarily used in the research, especially for more obese individuals or people who are, pre-diabetic and stuff like that. In the body composition world, like fitness, when you see people who, are typically in really great shape and they say they use intermittent fasting, more likely than not, they're doing some form of daily intermittent fasting with, 16, 18 hours of fasting. Okay, so now that you kind of understand what exactly intermittent fasting is, you might ask, why would this be effective? So there's a bunch of different theories. A lot of people think that it has something to do with increasing insulin sensitivity. Just as like a brief little background, insulin is released by the pancreas in response to blood glucose. Okay, and its primary purpose is to drive glucose out of the blood into various tissues, such as like muscle or, sometimes fat tissue. And it's thought that, a lot of people who are what is known as insulin resistant, where insulin doesn't do its job very well anymore, a lot of people think that intermittent fasting works for those individuals specifically because it gives their body a little bit of a break from chronic elevations of insulin. Okay, I'm not saying that is the reason why intermittent fasting works for people. I'm just saying that seems to be one of the benefits, and research seems to corroborate that spending significant portions of the day not consuming food is actually beneficial for improving things like insulin sensitivity. However, second, the most apparent reason why intermittent fasting works, especially for fat loss, is because since you have a restricted period of time when you're able to eat food, chances are you're not going to be able to make up for the calories that you didn't consume during the fasting period, plus all of the extra calories that you burned during the fasting period, such as if you were pretty active, you'd be expending energy. And since you're not eating, it comes from your body's storage of energy. And then once you do have the opportunity to eat, it becomes increasingly more difficult the shorter the time frame of eating availability is. It becomes increasingly more difficult to be able to compensate for those calories. So really, at the end of the day, there might be some special metabolic properties that are going on as a result of spending time not consuming food. But overall, the most likely reason that intermittent fasting actually works for people is because it becomes difficult to consume more calories than you're expending with such a short period of time to eat. So if, just to kind of get into, if you want to actually use this protocol, I suggest trying to approach it from a daily standpoint. I'm a big believer in circadian rhythm, and I believe that your circadian rhythm influences how your body responds to food. That's just a personal opinion, and based on reading about how circadian rhythm affects hormonal output, how it just affects how your body reacts to just about any different stimuli. So personally, I suggest using some form of intermittent fasting daily. And I think if you do something like this, you'll notice that you're not getting hungry. You feel better. You just have like an optimized response to just about everything. So if you're doing this where you're spending 4 days fasting and then 3 days not fasting, you run the risk of creating some weird metabolic environment in the body. I'm not saying that will happen for sure. It's just a personal opinion and why I decide to fast on a daily basis. Okay. Some people suggest when you first start with a 24-hour fast. I personally don't think that's a great idea, primarily because almost never will you experience that unless you're doing, complete 24-hour fasts. And right off the bat, going from eating normally to 25 hours of fasting, I don't think it's a great idea, and it's not conducive of, you actually wanting to stick to the routine. So what I suggest is you start the fast the night before, start something at, 8, 9, or 10 p.m. after your last meal, which would be normal, and then just extend the duration of not eating until you reach a 12-hour mark. Okay, so you're essentially just skipping your first meal of the day and then, pushing back that time a little bit later into the day. Start with something like 12 hours. And, it sounds like a long time, but consider that you're sleeping anywhere from 7 to 8 hours. So really, you're only spending 5 to 4 hours in the morning not eating food. And then once you become more acclimated to that sort of schedule and you understand that, like, oh, my muscle isn't falling off the bone, or, hey, I'm not starving in the morning, then you can sequentially increase the time of fasting until you reach, whatever schedule you want, 16 or 18 hours or even 14 hours, or you might just stick with 12. It doesn't really matter. It just depends on what works best for you. Okay. And second, I just wanted to point out that if you are starting an intermittent fasting protocol, you have to understand that there's a short transition period. Okay, it's not going to be like, oh, I'm just fasting today, I'm not hungry, or I'm not groggy, or I don't feel like crap. There's a really good chance that for a couple days you will. So you have to think about that you've spent the entirety of your life, waking up and eating immediately. And then to drastically change that and say like, oh, I'm not going to eat breakfast, that's kind of like a weird situation for your body to be in. However, the transition period for, feeling really hungry and groggy and stuff, I personally, it's hard for me to remember how it was back when I first started, but I don't remember anything more than a week or two. And I can tell you that the issues that I experienced were certainly not severe enough for me to consider not using the method anymore. So I would say, just start kind of slow, start with a short duration of fasting, just something slightly larger than what you normally would do, and then increase that duration sequentially until you reach the perfect time period for yourself. Okay, and also just remember that there might be some small little transition period where you might not feel so great, but I can assure you that after a week or so, you'll start to feel better, and you'll start to figure out strategies to deal with it for your own body. So I think that about wraps it up with this intermittent fasting little boss bite. I hope that it clarifies what intermittent fasting is for you, why it works, and how you can begin to implement it into your own routine. If you have any questions about this stuff, please feel free to visit bossstrength.com and search for intermittent fasting. I have probably like 5 or 6 different articles, some including research reviews, just on the efficacy of intermittent fasting. And alternatively, if you have additional specific questions about this, please consider, commenting below or commenting on the website. And I almost always respond within 24 hours. So if you like this content, please consider giving it a like. And if you really like this content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and to the podcast. So I think that about wraps it up for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.